in order to finish the topic of opening philosophy, it makes sense to discuss some postulates that you can derive from the three opening principles to develop, to control the center, and king safety. Before I get straight into postulates, I just wanted to discuss something about what constitutes a development advantage. Because if you have more pieces developed than your opponent, that gives you a development advantage. However, it's only temporary. Therefore, in order to make anything out of your development advantage, you have to attack. You have to create some threats, whether it's against the king or whether you are attacking a piece, okay? So, in order for your development advantage to count as an advantage, you have to do something early and aggressive. Otherwise, your opponent will catch up and the development element of the game will not count for anything. It won't matter. So that's the thing. For example, let's talk about the Sicilian, one of the most popular responses against the king's pawn. One of the common openings from the Sicilian is the Sicilian Najdorf, which arises after this opening. This is the Najdorf, okay? If we go back, to reach the Najdorf, it's e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight to f6, knight c3, and a6, the Najdorf. It looks like white has two pieces developed versus black's one piece, and it's also white's turn to move, and when he develops his bishop, he will have three pieces versus one. Also, both of these bishops are ready to go, whereas this bishop is ready to go, but this one isn't. He still has to make a pawn move somewhere to develop his bishop. So, because of these factors, it should seem like white has a huge development advantage, right? He's got so many more pieces ready to go. Well, it's not so simple. This is a very popular opening for both sides that is reached very commonly at the Grandmaster level, and practice shows that white has no way to force anything with his development advantage. Well, he can kind of try to with some of the most aggressive variations after this bishop g5, but it's kind of like black gets compensation in some way, like some endgame advantage or defensive resources. After bishop e2, which is one of the modest but good lines against the Najdorf. Okay, it looks like we have four pieces out, but now I'm about to talk about one concept, a postulate of development called tempo. What is tempo? Tempo is basically where you attack something and force it to go back, or, force it to retreat. And this is important because tempo helps speed up your development. It also makes your opponent's development lag behind. So basically, that's what it does, is it speeds up your development. Tempo. What is a move for black here that employs the concept of tempo? How do you get tempo in this position, do you think? Black can play pawn to e5, attacking the knight, forcing it to move back, moving the same piece again. It already moved twice. It took here, and now it has to move a third time. And by moving this pawn, since it was a central pawn, it opens up this bishop to get developed and allow our king to castle. And all of the sudden, it already appears that black is catching up in development. And this is true for like all variations in the Najdorf. No matter what you try to play for white, black will just catch up in development. And yes, indeed, e5 is one of the reasons, but even e6 here would be a good move, actually, just in practice. Even though it's not forcing this knight to do anything. For example, okay, castle, bishop e7. We can see two pieces developed versus four. Let's consider castling as one count of development. Believe it or not, even this is good for black because practice shows that white cannot crack down this solid center and black will just catch up in development. It doesn't take long to catch up. You just do something like this and your rooks will already be connected. Okay, so we talked about how development is a temporary advantage and how tempo is a useful tool to boost your development. Let's show one more example for tempo. Okay, so let's say this c3. Okay, it's kind of an odd move. It's not the best move in this position. The best move is to play knight f3. It develops a piece, prepares to get your king castled early, and it controls the center. It also attacks this pawn with tempo, forcing opponent to defend it somehow, like this, to protect the pawn. If he does g6, for example, then you can just take. So that's why knight f3 is considered better than a move like bishop c4, is because it attacks this pawn with tempo. That's also why this is considered better than knight c3 because knight f3 was attacking the pawn with tempo. Okay, about this position, I just wanted to illustrate the bad move. Bishop c5. This is a bad move in this position because even though it develops, even though it controls the center, and even though it prepares the black king to castle, it actually gets kicked by d4, gaining a tempo. And now, all of a sudden, white has two pawns developed. Well, because they are central pawns, like in the previous video, I was explaining how these count as like somewhat of a piece themselves, and they count as development. So after the bishop retreats, both our bishops are ready to go, and we have 3 pieces versus black's 1 piece. So he has a huge development advantage, white does. And after some moves here, okay, white can play like this and attack early. He has to attack pretty quickly, otherwise he will lose the development advantage, and in the meantime, black will catch up somehow. You could even play e5. Maybe this is even stronger because now we are forcing the knight backwards, and now the black king cannot even castle. So e5 was even better, even stronger. So maybe knight f6 is not a good move. Maybe black should play something like d6 first. Anyway, this is just a horrible position for black. And it was better to play a move like knight f6, counter-attacking the pawn, developing, or you could also play d5. One more example to illustrate about tempo. We were talking about how we should move our central pawns forward. So why is d4 not as good as knight f3? Because black can take, forcing white to take basically if he wants to play normal. And now black can gain a tempo on this queen, bringing us to a new postulate that's related to both development and tempo, which says do not bring your queen out early. Do not bring it like where it's exposed. What do you think black should play here? Well, black can play knight c6, kicking this queen. uh, developing with a tempo, right? We attack and we develop and we control the center at the same time. This is good. And now the queen has to move somewhere, like queen e3. And, okay, black will have to play very accurate in order to reap his development advantage. But, well, it's not really development advantage still because both of these bishops are ready to go. But it will become a development advantage because this queen will later be a subject of attack, and black will push the queen backwards by developing the pieces. Anyway, enough about tempo and about moving the queen out early. Moving the queen out early is not so good because now we can kick it and prepare to bring our bishop out and our knight and castle. So the queen has to move back, but now we can bring the knight out. And we are going to play bishop g7 and be ahead in development, essentially. Because this queen could later get attacked by like knight d4 or bishop g4. And knight d4 would also be attacking this pawn. So that's why they say don't bring the queen out early. New topic. Let's talk about not moving too many pawns in the opening. Lasker famously said in the opening, 1 or 2 pawn moves, but not more. I should clarify that if you move only 1 pawn, that's not good because this bishop has to get out. So in order to get both your bishops out, you need to move 2 pawns. What he meant is like in the first 3 to 5 moves, because back then opening theory was not developed. It was like even the world champion games got out of their theory that they knew by move 5. But anyway, in the first 5 moves or so, Lasker says 1 or 2 pawn moves in the opening, not more. And the reason for that is if you move too many pawns, then you lose your, like, it's a bad opportunity cost. You sacrifice development for moving just random pawns, and you don't want to do that. You want to make healthy pawn moves that contribute to the development and not move random pawns like c3 or something, or even worse like h3, just completely out of the center. So don't make unnecessary pawn moves like this because black will have a development advantage, and he should be able to exploit it. Usually, if you have a development advantage, it's very likely that you can make use of it and create a better position. It's just that there's some special cases, like in that opening I discussed in the Sicilian, where opening advantage cannot exploit the position and give you an advantage. Any other topics? Well, I will talk about one more. Connecting the rooks, okay? Let's just throw in some random moves for black to illustrate what I mean. It's very important to connect rooks because rooks are kind of like the most clumsy piece in all of chess. Rooks belong on files that will either get open or are open or semi-open where there's only one pawn and not both your pawn and the opponent's pawn. So the topic is about connecting the rooks, and this is important for finishing your development because when you connect rooks, it basically allows your rooks to support the harmony of the rest of your pieces. Basically, that's why you want to move your queen out too eventually somewhere here and not just some random square. I guess that when you follow the principle of development, your rooks will inherently get connected eventually because all you need to do to make like all these moves is just to know to develop your pieces, and then your rooks finally get connected and you can bring them towards the center or wherever an open file may lay. Okay, I think that sums up everything that's important for this video topic of opening philosophy. In my next video, I will discuss about building an opening repertoire, and then I will go over some opening trap stuff after that, and then move towards the middle game and end game. Because for the beginner, it is important to work on opening philosophy and stuff we've been doing so that we can quickly start beginning the rest of our work on the middle game and end game. The opening is really important, but requires the least amount of work. The more important thing in the long term is that we build our middle game and end game skills. So next video I will talk about some practical opening repertoire stuff that allows you to always get a good position in the middle game without having to study the opening so much. On that note, I will also talk about again opening traps so that you can prevent getting trapped in the opening so early in the game, and also just it will be good tactical practice. Anyway, I hope this helps, and I think we are done with opening philosophy for now.